Numbers are thrown out all the time. Are they proof of some truth or just fluff that bluffs us? These statistics, they need some serious looking into. And that's what I'll do. I'm Brendan Fernandez. We find out the story behind the statistics. Because some numbers are just worth figuring out. In the lottery of life, a Singaporean baby wins big. An international index claims that a baby born here in 2013 is starting life in the 6th best place in the world. This, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, the sister company of The Economist magazine. And if you look just at Asia, the Singaporean baby is off to the best possible start. I mean, if these guys could say it, they'd probably say, yeah, life is good. But is it really? Another group of number crunchers, however, have said that there is plenty that Singaporeans are dissatisfied with. It seems that we have less to smile about than people in Russia and, surprisingly, Afghanistan and Iraq. So, is life here good or bad? Why are the findings about the same people so different? It's time to figure that out. The EIU used economic forecasts of the year 2030 to come up with a Where to Be Born index. 2030. A baby born today would be about 17 years old by then. In which countries are we likely to find the 17-year-old living the healthiest and wealthiest life? And where are the worst off 17-year-olds found? 10 factors were taken into account. They are material well-being as measured by per capita income, quality of family life as measured by divorce rates, political freedom, job security as determined by the unemployment rate, climate, personal security, which looks at the homicide rate and risk of terrorism, quality of community life derived from membership of religious organizations, RCs or social groups, governance taken from ratings in corruption, gender equality as seen by the number of parliament seats held by women, and life expectancy. We'll help you figure out how Singapore did. The circles may look the same size, but they don't weigh the same. Factors considered more important were given greater weightage. So this is how much weightage they were given. And over here are our scores: low, medium, and high. And now, I'm going to shift them around. These factors were given the heaviest weightage: material well-being, life expectancy, job security, and personal safety. Singapore did well in these, which pulled up our ranking. Like our GDP per capita, for example. In 2001, our GDP per capita was $21,000 US. Then, we started vaulting over economic juggernauts like the US, Japan, and Germany. 10 years later, our GDP more than doubled. In 2011, it was slightly more than $50,000 US. Now, these are the factors in the medium weight band. Here's how we fared. Gender equality, measured by the number of women in parliament seats. Quality of community and family life. And political freedom. If you look here, you'll see that Singapore has a dismal report card in terms of climate. We scored poorly in that. But why? What's wrong with a climate that has no typhoons and no natural disasters? I find out from Sumana, a senior analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And befitting of life in Singapore, the sixth best place to be born, we did that over a good lunch. Sumana, what is the problem with climate in Singapore?
14 degrees Celsius. What people have reported is their ideal temperature. And of course, Singapore, almost every day we have a big variation from 14 degrees Celsius.
I was about to say, 14 degrees is the ideal. Singapore is about double that on average. But who's to say that climate is an important factor anyway? In fact, how did these 10 factors get chosen as the main determinants of how good my life or your life is? To do this, they ran a multivariate regression analysis. A multi-what? These reports and surveys that tell us about Singapore, whether life here is good or bad. How do studies like the Where to Be Born Index know what's important to my life or your life? How do they know, for example, that GDP per capita or personal safety or climate is important? For that, they run a multivariate regression analysis. A multi-what? A multivariate regression analysis. The aim of running the analysis is to find the strongest predictors of well-being. It's an extremely complicated mathematical process, but here's a simplified version of how it's done. These represent people. The green ones with the big smiles are those who report high levels of well-being. The yellow ones with the smaller smiles are those who report medium levels of well-being. The red ones with a frown are those who report low levels of well-being. In the Where to Be Born Index, the statisticians were most interested with those with high levels of well-being, so they'll stay in the spotlight. Now we work backwards. We know these people are happy. Let's find out why. Let's rearrange them, this time according to a specific factor. A factor like national income, that is, how rich a country is, in high, medium, and low levels. Now the groups are a little more mixed up, with people of different levels of well-being in different groups. But then again, it's also clear that a lot of people with high levels of well-being are found in the group with high national income. This is the kind of link which makes national income a strong predictor of well-being. This might be obvious, but you could do this for any factor, like education levels, or whether you live in a cold or a hot country. The aim is to find the factors which are the strongest predictors of well-being. And that is how the 10 most important factors in the Where to Be Born Index were determined. Now we know what the factors are. Here's how Singapore did. 10 is a perfect score. In 2013, Switzerland came up tops with a score of 8.22. Singapore scores an average of 8. It's the only Asian country to make the list. Now you know the 6 best places to be born. But where are the worst places to be born in 2013? Ukraine scored 4.98. Kenya, 4.91. And the worst place to be born in 2013? Nigeria, with a score of 4.74. The multivariate regression analysis helped to identify factors like job security and national income as strong predictors of well-being. But it isn't a perfect science, of course, as Professor David Chan, an expert in research methods, explained to me.
When two very important factors are correlated with each other, this regression method will throw out one of them.
Could you give an example of that?
So for example, if work-life balance is important, and work-life balance is highly correlated with income. And then it so happened that income is slightly more significant than work-life balance. Now work-life balance will get thrown out, and income will remain in there.
So you actually lose a factor that might be quite significant.
Yes, but not only because it is important, but it may be something that you can do something about. Now, some would argue that it doesn't matter because it still predicts, and they are right. But it does matter for policymakers, because what you throw out could be the one that you could actually leverage on and do something about it. The one that remains may be something that you can't do anything about.
The EIU did a Where to Be Born Index in 1988 as well. And back then, we didn't fare so well. In fact, we were ranked 36th, tied with East Germany. The United States came in first, while the Philippines, India, and China were all ranked higher than Singapore. Why were we ranked so low 25 years ago?
In the 1988 version of the Where to Be Born Index. And we had two rather interesting things there. One was the Yawn Index, which is the degree to which a country is irredeemably boring despite having many other factors that are good about it. Yeah. And the Philistine factor is a rating that we gave countries for cultural poverty. In the 1988 index, the US scored very high in both those and was elevated to the first position. And Switzerland and Singapore in 1988 scored low on that.
Imagine if you were a Singaporean living here in 1988. You would visit the area around the Esplanade, not for a performance, but for the Satay Club. You would go to the Van Cleef Aquarium instead of Sentosa for life under the sea.
Singapore, let's give ourselves a big round of applause!
You would have been jiving at Swing Singapore in Orchard Road instead of in front of this skyline as part of the National Day celebrations. I certainly wouldn't call all that boring, but life's a different story today. We have leaped over 30 spots up the league, from 38th to 6th. And yet there are some who say the gains are not that great. In the last few years, Singapore has caught the attention of international researchers. These trend spotters have noticed that we are not really behaving, thinking, or responding as expected. Take, for example, the commonly held belief that money can buy happiness. Not quite true when it comes to Singapore. Gallup, a research company known for measuring human emotions and well-being, ranked Singapore rather low in the Positive Experience Index. Which means that while it appears life is good, we don't feel so good about it. What's this index all about? Let's have a row showing GDP per capita. We start at 0 and go all the way to 60,000 US dollars. That's just about the highest average you can have. And over here, we have the percentage of respondents who say they are thriving. That is, those who view their present lives and the next 5 years positively. We can see a thick cluster of countries here, countries with lower levels of GDP per capita and lower perceptions of well-being. These countries are poorer. Their people tend to feel less well-off too in terms of quality of life. Amongst this group we can find Indonesia, India, and China. Then there are these countries up here, high per capita income and high perceived levels of well-being. Here we can find the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. We can draw a line through the graph and see that most countries tend to stick rather close to the line. That's because there's usually a strong relationship between wealth and well-being. If you're rich, you tend to feel good. But of course, there are some who stray far from the line. Over here you have Latin American countries like Brazil, Venezuela, Costa Rica, and Panama. They stand out because despite low levels of GDP per capita, their people are reporting very high levels of wellness. In other words, they're poor, but happy. At the other end of the spectrum are countries like Taiwan, Japan, and Hong Kong. Now, these are rich regions, but score below average in perception of well-being. So, where's Singapore? We are the red dots right here. We are very much ahead of the pack in terms of GDP per capita, but well off the mark when it comes to feeling good about life. In fact, we're the unhappiest in the world. Singapore is what researchers call an outlier, a result distant from the rest. we don't behave as statisticians expect us to? Why are we feeling dissatisfied despite our level of wealth? So, Chitong, is there something strange going on with the national psyche?
Actually, yes, Brandon.
Okay.
What we found in 2008 and 2009 was a huge dip in our evaluative well-being, how we felt about our lives and how we felt about our lives in the future. We started out at 47% of Singaporeans thriving in 2008, down to 19% in
Wow.
2009.
Okay.
So it's quite a huge dip. And then bounced back again in 2010 and 2011, but it never quite reached pre-crisis levels.
Imagine if you were in Singapore in 2008. You would have seen the city light up for the first Formula One night race. But you would also have witnessed the Lehman Brothers collapse in September. And you might have felt some repercussions due to the fact that Singapore's economy slumped to a 5-year low. That was also the year you probably felt more of a squeeze. Our population grew at a record 5.5%. It was truly a year of unpredictability. How does Gallup know how we feel about life? A lot of the questions used to measure positive emotions were about what you felt yesterday. Did you feel well rested yesterday? Did you smile or laugh a lot yesterday? Did you learn something interesting yesterday? Which feeling did you experience yesterday? Enjoyment, physical pain, worry, sadness, stress, anger. And last, were you treated with respect yesterday? For that last question about whether we were treated with respect, we ranked 160th out of the 160 countries polled. Yes, we came in dead last.
Someone who says that they do feel well respected are likely to say yes to the other 4 questions in the positive experience index.
I see. Yeah.
Whereas when they say no, they are also likely to say no to more of the remaining 4 questions on the positive experience index. And in Singapore in particular, when we look at the data and we broke it down, it was very strange to see the number of people saying yes to the fact that they felt well respected drop quite dramatically, just from 2008 to 2010.
How dramatically?
We started out at 81% in 2008, and we dropped all the way down to 45%.
Life, it seems, was never the same after 2008. What has been bothering us since? A look at a regular day in Singapore might throw up some clues. The early morning jostle on the way to work. Public transport is clearly one of the things Singaporeans are unhappy with. There was a 19% drop in satisfaction with public transport from 2010 to 2011. That's because from 2007 to 2011, daily ridership increased by 423,000. People equal to the populations of Bedok and Bukit Batok combined. And when we get to work, only 2% of Singaporeans feel engaged with our jobs. Singapore, it seems, is a country of contradictions. The Where to Be Born Index by the EIU, that's really actual well-being we're talking about. The Gallup World Poll, however, looked at perceived well-being. Only 46%, less than half, have positive emotions. That's less than Syria, Haiti, and Iraq. Professor Chan, an expert in research methods, had this to say about Gallup's findings.
Basically, they have 5 positive emotions and 5 negative emotions, right? So you get 10 emotions. Think about a hypothetical country where 70% of the population say they experience these positive emotions, and only 10% of them says they experience negative emotions.
So that looks pretty good.
Now, most logical person will say this country is doing pretty well because 70% positive, negative. Now, using Gallup's method, what they will do is they will ignore positive and negative. They will combine the two and take the average. 70 plus 10 divided by 2, you will get 40. Right? So you get a rank of 40 for this country. Doesn't look very good. But emotional well-being is really about the relative presence of positive emotions and the absence of negative emotions. All researchers when you want to examine well-being, emotional well-being, you will have to take the difference of the positive and negative because you want more of this and less of this. So the correct computation is not to add them up, but to take their difference. So you should take 70 and from it you minus 10 in order to get the emotionality, a well-being score. And the well-being score in this case is 70 minus 10, and that will actually give you 60. So this country should score 60. So this country, which looks pretty good for most of us, rightly would score 60 on emotional well-being.
What about the reverse? Let's say, what happens if the country is low positive and let's say very high negative? What would that look like?
Well, yes, we can illustrate that. Now, think of a country which is pretty bad, full of violence and negative things. And when you ask them about emotions, only 10% of the population say I experience positive emotions, and 90% of the population say I've been experiencing negative emotions.
That looks like a very bad place to be.
Yes, any logical person will have to produce a ranking whereby this country is going to be poor on well-being. Now, think about a situation now. If you ignore the sign, again using Gallup's method, 90 plus 10 divided by 2, this country will score 50.
So this country with 90% negative emotions actually scores higher than the one with 70-10 spread.
Yes, recall that the country scored 40 using Gallup's method. Now, the right way to compute for this country, which is really not doing very well on emotional well-being, is that when you take the difference, it's going to be 10 minus 90 is minus 80, right? Which actually correctly reflects that the country is low on well-being.
So there are disagreements about the way Gallup used its data. But most experts still value the answers they obtained from surveying thousands and thousands across the world. Even the UN uses Gallup data.
Professor Chang, should we bother with subjective studies of well-being?
Yes, we definitely should bother with subjective well-being. Now, the problem colloquially is that the word subjective tends to give it a negative meaning. It's not objective. But that's not what subjective really means. Subjective means how I perceive, how I experience, and what matters to me. Now, we know from research that actually perception is reality, and it is how we feel, what we think that is going to affect our attitudes and behavior.
Singapore is a tremendous performer in providing basic needs like food and shelter, lack of corruption, law enforcement, and employment.
So yes, we have a quality of life that many would envy. But Singaporeans don't seem to be enjoying the view as much as we should. What exactly is bothering us? Precisely, how do we fix it? We can't say for sure. But while world polls and indexes can't tell us everything, they can at least help us to know ourselves a little bit better.